On October 16th and 17th, the best Catan players from across the nation flocked to Minneapolis, Minnesota to compete in the 2021 U.S. National Championship. For those unfamiliar with the format of this tournament, after 3 preliminary games, the top 16 would then go on to semifinals, where it's win and go to the championship, or lose and go home. Now let's jump into the action and see what happened. This is the final board, the aftermath of the championship game. Now right off the bat, something you may notice is that this board is not ABC. So in other words, if you look at the instructions within the rules of Catan, illustration Q in this case, in order to set up the board, you do a spiral pattern based off the letters on the back of the number tokens. That's the ABC boards. It'll often lead to hexes being in a similar pattern. That's why you'll see a 659 or a 5910 many times on these boards. However, for competitive play, you often see customized boards. These boards are specially made to balance out all 4 positions. Now, what's this video for? Well, today we're going to be going through, first off, how the players actually settled in this game. Then we're going to talk about the pros and cons of each of their setups. And then lastly, we're going to go through and I'm going to talk about some of the ideas I have of alternate placements they could have made, where if I was in their shoes, what would I have done? Would I have done certain things differently? Now let's get into looking at and analyzing this board. So let's start with how the players settled. And I'm not going to be using this time to give my opinions on their placements, because that'll come later whenever we highlight alternate placement ideas. So the placement order is as follows, and the way this was determined is based off the seeding. So in this case, blue was the number 1 overall seed. They get to choose if they want to place 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th after looking at the board. So it's completely in their hands. The next highest seed would then get to do the same thing with the remaining positions and so on. In this case, blue decided to pick 1st and go with the 6, 5, 11. Double or and cheap pointing left. White then goes 9, 8, 11 or wheat cheap pointing down. Orange in 3rd goes 4, 9, 8. Double wheat and brick pointing left. Red in 4th position picks the 6, 10, 3 pointing down and the 8, 9, 12 pointing up to start with the free road. Back to orange, who goes 8, 3, 10 or wheat sheep pointing left. White then picks the 5, 3, 11 double wood and ore pointing down. And lastly, blue goes on the 4, 10 coastal spot with the wheat port and points left. Now we can look at the pros and cons of each of these setups. Let's first look at blue's setup here. They're obviously playing an or wheat sheep only game, which involves buying a lot of development cards and building primarily upward. However, blue will be underproducing wheat quite a bit. One way to clearly see this is by taking a look at the ideal or wheat sheep ratio of 5, 4, 3. This means for every 5 points of ore, you want 4 points of wheat and 3 points of sheep, or some variation of this. Blue's current ratio, based off of his placements, is 7, 3, 7 respectively, which we find by just counting the dots under the numbers that he's on. So how can blue make up for this lack of production and even out this ratio? Well, by getting on this 3 for 1 port, blue will not only increase their production, but become more flexible in porting these excess resources into wheat. Now let's look at white's setup, and I actually like it quite a bit, especially when white is able to road settle onto the 4, 11 and get the 3 for 1 port. They're going to be very difficult to stop. They're currently 4 points of ore, 4 points of wheat, and 5 points of sheep. Very strong numbers across the board. Once they get to the 411, they're going to have 8 points of sheep and a whole bunch of wood that they're now going to be able to manage with that 3 for 1 port. So the way I like to visualize this is every 3 points of wood can go towards either ore or wheat. And also there's 6 points of sheep there that we can really allocate to ore and wheat to help set us up for a 5, 4, 3 ratio. Now let's move on to looking at orange's setup. They're pretty stuck without a strong port or even an easy expansion spot. There's not a simple road settle anywhere for orange. So I'd expect a pretty slow start for them, specifically because they don't have any wood at all. The game plan in my head would either be to trade for wood and try to get onto the 6-2, or just trade away your brick for ore where you can to try to get an early city, or to pop a lot of development cards. There's so much wheat in their hand, and without a port, it's going to be very difficult to manage it. So in my opinion, I think orange has a very tough game ahead of them. Lastly, let's look at red's setup, and I definitely do not envy red's position. On the positives, red has the best wood and brick combination in the entire game. which means longest road could be in her future. However, she will be unable to occupy the center of the board to connect her roads, which is often a strong move to do in order to defensively limit your contender's space to try to take road from you. But this is okay if red primarily focuses on building off of one of her settlements. This creates an organic progression of increasing production while extending your roads. But in red's case, it looks like the goal may be to first get the brick port and then double up on the 8 or 9 brick up top, the exact opposite of organically progressing your longest road. But in red's case, I think doubling up on these 8 and 9 bricks is kind of necessary, as she is missing ore and sheep completely. I also envision a very tough game for red. Now let's look at some alternate placement ideas that I personally had. Let's wipe off the board, and let's just start from the very beginning. I like to use the acronym PREP OTC, which stands for Production, Resources, Expansion, Ports, and then outs, Trade Partners, Competition. These are just things I want to look at whenever I'm settling to open up the game. So I really like blue's position here on the 6-5-11, primarily because the 6 ore is such a huge advantage. No one's going to place on the 6-2 to open up, so you'll have that advantage for quite some time, and no one else can match it. The big problem here is getting wheat on the way back. There is a lot of wheat in the game though, so trades are at least possible. It's not a starved board in the slightest. The 3-for-1 is uncontested, and that's always a great thing. And the wood port could even come in handy, giving you some more outs in case you get completely locked out of wheat in the slightest chance. White then goes 9-8-11. And I'm a little iffy on this pick, and that is primarily because white is not pointed towards a port. And picking second means you might not even get one on the way back. In order to hedge that risk, me personally, I would probably try to find a spot that leads to an easy port that's not necessarily contested. With that being said, in this position, there really isn't that great spot that jumps out. I think I personally probably would have picked the 8-9-4 and try to get on the wheat port. However, as we discussed before, that 4-10 is a very viable option for blue. So the only reason I am taking the 8-9-4 here is because I am confident in my ability to negotiate a way where I can retain that 4-10 expansion spot. So one way that the board might place out is as follows. And if this is the case, honestly, this is one of the few scenarios where maybe you can't help but blue take that 4-10. I think white's really good to get the 5-3-11 here. And even though you don't have the wheat port, you're still in a great spot and have a strong potential to do some damage in this game if you can get on that 3-for-1 down on the 4-11. However, an alternate way is that orange takes the 5-3-11 in the situation. And so let's say you're white here, you have the option of going on that 6-10-3. However, if you do that, blue of course goes on the 4-10 and blocks out your port. So what could you do to make sure that you retain that 4-10 expansion spot? Well, one option that I see right away is seeing if blue wants the 10-3-4. If this is the case, I would go 6-10, allowing blue to get the 10-3-4. Sure, they have a strong position now, with plenty of expansion spots that they don't have to worry about getting plowed to, and more wheat to cover all their excess ore. But I get a wheat port, I'm one road and settle away from the 6 ore, and I have strong enough wood and brick where I can try to make those things happen early in the game. If you're in white shoes here, would you just take the 6-10-3 or try to work out a deal like this? But let's just continue with white placing how they did in the actual game. Orange, of course, I would agree with the 8-9-4 since I like that spot in second position too. I think there's nothing wrong with that, just again, have the mindset of doing what you have to do in order to make sure you get the 4-10 expansion spot. But let's keep going on to red in fourth position. As I said before, they had a very, very tough decision to make here. Now, if I'm placing in fourth position, something that pops out to me right away is this 9-5-12, 8-3-10. You get all 5 resources. You have space in the middle connect. This is probably what I would have done if under a lot of time pressure. But let's place this out. 8-3-10, 9-5-12. All right, cool. We have a sheep port that can do a lot of damage and an uncontested 3-for-1. However, let's look at this setup in general. It's good. It's fine. But if we focus on C competition, I think we're pretty outmatched. There's definitely a chance we could win, but how can we elevate this position even more? Well, we have to make the most of what our advantage is right off the bat. And our advantage is that we have strong wood and strong brick. So how do we make the most of this? Well, it's important to know that this prep OTC is not order of operations. It's not PEMDAS, right? The order does not matter. You can skip these. You can forget about some of them. So in this instance, let's completely just forget about P production, right? Let's go against what you're used to thinking of and actually take less production. So instead of the 8-3-10 here, how about we do the 4-10-3? How does this change things? Well, I think orange would still settle 5-3-11, white would then go 6-10-3, and then ultimately blue would go 4-10 again. And no one takes the 8-3-12, in my opinion. No one's even really competing for those spots right off the bat. This allows you to have more time to go onto like an 8-3-12 and the sheep port, connect the middle, one road to the 3-for-1, one road to the 8-10. By taking less production off the bat, you have the ability to gain more production through an organic way of creating your longest road. So ultimately, I think I would have done 10-4-3, 9-5-12, and taken the risk of having maybe a slower start. But let's play it out as red truly did in the game and keep moving forward. And now it's back to orange's turn. Orange in the game goes 8-10-3. And I don't like this pick at all. Sure, you're setting up for a great or wheat sheep setup, but that's only if you get the 4-10. Otherwise, you're very stuck in this game. And by limiting the wheat spots left available for blue, you're pretty much guaranteeing that he takes your 4-10 expansion spot away. So as I said before, as orange, I think 5-3-11 is great. You have strong wood to pair with your strong brick. You have two incredibly great expansion spots with the 3-for-1 port and the 4-10 wheat port. And now your goal here is to make sure that white doesn't take the 8-3-10 and leaves that for blue. So I would place 5-3-11, but make sure I'm still talking to white to see if they place either on the 6-2 or the 5-9, and make sure that what they do doesn't severely jeopardize my game. So let's continue forward. Let's say orange does place on the 5-3-11. Now from white's perspective, do you place on the 8-3-10? You kind of landlocked yourself, as I stated was a big risk before. However, you do have strong or wheat sheep. I think it might honestly be a death sentence to place on the 8-3-10 because there's no single road settle away for you to expand. And ultimately, unless you're planning on getting 4 victory points by pulling devs, you need another settlement somewhere else on the board to city up. If I'm white, ultimately I try to squeeze out any value I can by letting blue get on this valuable 10 wheat. I could say, hey, I'll let you do that. Just leave me the 8-10 expansion spot. That way you can get another road settle in there and be close to connecting your roads, occupying some sort of the middle of the board. Now you have a more clear game plan. But let's continue on with what really happened here. Orange went 8-3-10, white went 5-3-11. However, during white's placements, the announcer said this.
Yeah, honestly, I might go something along the line of the 3-4-11.
I would look at the 3-4-11 as well, because the sheep port is at the 5-11.
Yes.
So you can build a road up there. Right. And then if that's the case, if you take the 3-4-11, you're basically racing Bo for largest army.
Yes.
Ooh, 5-3-11.
Over the 3-4-11?
That's interesting, because it blocks off her own sheep port with the 8 sheep.
Yeah, now she's going for the 3-1.
I don't have any spots.
The announcers think white should have initially placed on the 4-3-11 and gone to the 5-11 sheep port as their first expansion spot. Well, let's visualize how this would affect white's position. Once the sheep port is attained, this port actually allows white to be technically more effective in some aspects. Now, all 8 points of wood are neatly used to port for or wheat, and 6 of our sheep can be used to port for 3 cards rather than just 2. So the announcers are right? Well, I actually still think the 5-3-11 is better. Firstly, because you start the game with more production. And this increased production is in wood, aka a very vital resource in order to road and settle onto a port. In other words, getting to the 3-for-1 port from the 5-3-11 should in theory happen a lot quicker than getting to the sheep port from the 4-3-11. Lastly, without a 3-for-1, you might find your hands very stuck oftentimes throughout the game, because it's going to be clogged with wood and hard to port away. This then increases the likelihood of you 7ing out throughout the game, and then would therefore technically make you less efficient after all. But that's really just my opinion on this. It is blue's turn to place 8th, and I agree with going on the 4-10 wheat port. As we stated before, this setup is fine, and we know our objectives. Well, that concludes my placement analysis of the 2021 USA Championship board. It's a really interesting board, so please in the comments down below, tell me your thoughts. Am I an idiot? Do you like some of my ideas? I'm excited to hear what you guys think. And thanks for watching.